Well, hello everybody. John Maddox here on this beautiful, at least in Chesterton, Indiana, it's beautiful Monday morning. I trust that you had a wonderful weekend and that many of you were actually able to go to church and didn't have to watch by Zoom or YouTube, as more and more of our churches are getting opened. In our little town of Chesterton, our bishop allowed us 20 people in our small building, and that was a blessing. It was the first time it was opened up that far. Well, today on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter Live, as promised, what a blessing we have to say hello to our good friend, Father Theodore Petrides, the host of the relatively new podcast, Signs in Our Times, a podcast that we want to strongly recommend you listen to and watch because it has been very inspiring and we're excited to be a part of it. So, Father Theodore, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, John. Thank you so much. Very happy to be here with you and with whoever is watching along.
And tell me, where are you? Our listeners would love to know the beautiful setting you're in and the birds that we're hearing.
When we relocated and I was reassigned to the Church of Saints Constance and Helen in Reading, Pennsylvania, we didn't have a whole lot of time to find a place, but providentially God provided a condo just 5 minutes from the church in Wyomissing, but very close to the actual town of Reading, and this is the condo that we're in has three porches on it, so
Yeah,
we decided to be outside and still at home.
it looks
You know,
beautiful there too. I hope the sun is out.
it's a beautiful day. Yeah,
Oh,
already took a walk with my wife.
oh, very good, very good. So you're in Reading now, but you haven't been there all that long, have you? You were in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania prior to that.
Strasbourg for 23 years and Reading for a little over 8 months. Yeah.
23 years, that's a long time in one parish.
It was, and it was just the timing. We came from the metropolis of Chicago, but the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania, where Stroudsburg is located, is a lot closer to home and where most of both my family and my wife's family is. So when the opportunity came and the bishops gave their blessings, we relocated, and it was just a very small parish, but we had a lot of children, and there had been a number of priests before me not staying for very long. But I think when they saw this kind of large family and they said, "Oh, we like this family, let's keep them," and so we did, and it was a bit of a heartbreak uh,
Yeah.
when His Eminence, let us know that he needed somebody more experienced here in Reading, taking over for Father Tom Papalis, who was retiring in a much bigger parish, and after 23 years to make the break. But we're very thrilled to be here with the people of Saints Constantine and Helen.
Well, and I'm sure they are thrilled to have you. Tell us a little bit about your background. I assume with the name Petrides, you were brought up in the Orthodox Church?
Cradle Orthodox, grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, almost exclusively attending the parish of St. Luke's in Broomall,
No.
Pennsylvania. Um, one of four children, and the church for me was just always there. It was always present in our lives. My dad conducted the choir for a while. We were in the youth groups and the dance troupe, helping out at the food festival. It was just kind of our closest friends were the kids from the community, the Greek Orthodox community. But I don't think that I completely embraced the faith. I, you know, I wasn't quite prepared for college, and I didn't even think to choose a college that was where there was an Orthodox church close by. So I had four very long years kind of away from the church.
Mhm.
If you looked on me on the outside, you would have thought, I was having the time of my life, but I knew on the inside I was dying. And it was after college, coming back home and with my friends realizing, college didn't give us all the answers, that we started to probe a little bit more and ask for more from our spiritual leaders. And that's really when I had my awakening to Christ. And my life just changed. And, this is what I've been looking for all along, but not who I've been looking for all along.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's every mother and father's prayer as they send their children off to college, realizing they're going to have new experiences and perhaps new temptations, to know that when they came home, they're ready to also return to the church. So thank God that
Yeah.
that's how you were led. And
And it was actually through what I studied too. God
really,
just works in such miraculous ways. So I had been singing and involved in theater in high school, and so I just decided to continue and take some drama classes in college. And I was thinking maybe sociology, but I kept taking classes in the theater and ended up having to really make a choice what I was going to major in. Um, and I chose the theater. So my last semester, I saw 33 plays in 31 days in London with,
oh
a cohort of other students and a professor. And I thought the theater was going to be my life. But it was because of my background that I was asked to get involved with a young adult retreat in the Philadelphia area because they had decided instead of bringing in a keynote speaker, they wanted to put on a little play, a little
okay.
skit at the beginning of it to introduce the theme of the retreat. And that's when I began to read the Bible much more intensely in the way I'd been trained to read a play script. So, you read in between the lines and you have to really develop the characters and I was just blown away, wave of understanding and wow, this God is the greatest dramatist of all, and uh, and he really suffered. He really died on the
Yeah.
cross. He really died on the cross for me. He really loves me.
Mhm. That simple truth alone would be enough to change any life if we really believed it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you got married how soon after college?
Uh, I, I had that summer. It was actually a graduation. A journalism professor that I had studied videography with asked me to come back and shoot an alumni program that they were doing at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, which is my undergraduate. And when I showed up again 2 weeks later, that night he said, I got somebody I want you to introduce you to. My wife was had loved ancient everything ancient, and she was an ancient Greek and Latin, double major, classics major, and I was the Greek, and so that what totally unexpected, right out after I finished college, and again things providentially fell together that we were able to have a lot more time that summer than originally I thought I could, or I was going to be staying in Lexington, so that cemented the relationship, and we had 1 year long distance, and my wife came up for the retreat, which was very uh, important for us because she saw something happening. She saw something changing me. Now she understood it by participating in that retreat, saw the friends that I always have, saw she didn't have to be so worried about them, particularly the women friends that were a part of it all, and then she came up again for Pascha.
Hmm.
And she had studied Greek her whole life, being told it was a dead language. And when we went to the Holy Friday services, and she, watching from the choir loft, heard this language that she loved being used in the most sublime way for
Wow.
worship. It really spoke to her heart. And I proposed on Pascha, and
Hmm.
we were married that August, 3 months later, 3 or 4 months later, and spent our first year of married life together in Philadelphia. Had our first child, and then off to the seminary. Things just began happening very quickly in our lives.
How many children do you have?
So we have 6 children,
Yes.
and very, very blessed.
What,
2 boys and then 4 girls.
what are the age ranges now?
So our oldest, uh, who is also a Greek Orthodox Christian priest, Father Alexandros Alexi, is 34 now,
Hmm.
and then 32, 30, 27, 24, soon to be 21. So
And grandchildren?
3 and 2 on the way.
Uh,
So we're very excited about that too.
I think the way that I first learned about you and didn't really meet in person until the the GOA convention, if I recall. But I had heard about the trips, many trips that you had taken to Mount Athos. And on one of those trips, our own Father Andrew Stephen Damick was along. And he kept talking about Father Theodore and learning from your experience on the Holy Mountain. And so tell us a little bit about your trips to Mount Athos. When did those begin, and how often have you been?
Um, in 1988, I believe it was the summer of '88. Um, while I was at the seminary, Holy Cross put together a program that was going to be for the seniors, an end of the year uh, program of travel in Greece, and it had been idle for a few years, and then they were starting it up again. But by the time they got it together, most of the seniors had already made their plans after graduation and assignments and so forth. So they offered it to the married seminarians. So 6 of us went over. We were just going to be staying in Thessaloniki. Now they do a lot more with it, and we decided to play hooky for a week from our modern Greek language lessons at the university. Not that there wasn't amazing things and wonderful things for faith, forming our faith more fully, steeping in the faith in Thessaloniki itself, but we played hooky and went to the Holy Mountain for the first time. One of us didn't come back until the end of the semester,
Mm,
or the end of that week term. Uh, Profoundly affected us.
yeah.
So 3 or 4 of those 6 went back. We went back with our families after graduation and lived in Greece. So my wife and I, with 3 children, went in September of 1990, and we would go to the church that we went to was a dependency of one of the monasteries in the Holy Mountain,
Okay.
Simanopotra, and they also had a sister convent or monastery of 130 nuns also in the same region as Mount Athos, Chalkidiki, but that monastery is known as the Annunciation in Ormelia,
Oh,
and
yes.
we were just embraced kind of into that spiritual family, you might say. And so every other month I'd go off to the Holy Mountain for about a week and spend most of my time at Simanopotra. And then my wife would also take trips out to Ormelia. And
Hmm.
by the end of that time, America looked like a wasteland. We wanted to
Wow.
stay in Greece. But the Yaranta said, Christos in pandupi, Christ is everywhere.
Mm.
But don't forget what you've learned here. Take it back and share it with others. So we're profoundly affected by kind of living in an Orthodox country and seeing people. I mean, I got to talk to Father Paisios
Really?
almost every time I went to St. Paisios, almost every time I went to
Yes.
Holy Mountain. I'd go by his hut first, and many other people that were just I didn't know at the time the great privileges I was being given to meet
Yes.
people who I've come to appreciate so much more after the fact.
What was
And
St. Paisius like when he was living, and was he accessible?
he was. I mean, at the time, hundreds of people a day were coming by
Wow.
to see him, and that's on the Holy Mountain where they had a pretty strict limit of the number of pilgrims to be able to come on any one day. Um, when he would visit Thessaloniki or go other places, you would have lines 2-3 kilometers long of cars in parking lots, and people would wait 10 hours to see him for 10 seconds, and yet they would stay. Those 10 seconds were worth it. That changed my life because of the grace of God that was with him.
Yeah.
He could look at a person the way we're looking at each other, and we're seeing what we're wearing and what our facial hair looks like or lack of hair, and he sees the heart of a person. He would
Yeah.
see the soul of a person, and he in 10 seconds could say something that would be so meaningful to them that they would say that was life changing. Um, he has a great sense of humor. It's a very, very dry sense of humor, and he was so humble a person. But it was still our very first time I went, I kept a journal for my wife, and I wrote down the entire conversation with him and what each one of us asked him and his answers, and that's still kind of a treasure to me. Um, and my Greek wasn't very good, so when I was alone with him, sometimes I really struggled to understand everything that he was saying. Just being in his presence was enough.
Yeah, those of us who have not had that privilege, it's even hard for us to imagine what that would be like. And especially those of us who are newer to the faith and have never been to the Holy Mountain, we hear these stories and we're just trying to imagine that kind of depth of wisdom and grace and the
Yes.
same word is used in almost every case, and you used it, humility. Just such a presence of Christ in their lives.
He never stopped doing something.
Hmm.
Every time I was with him, even when I was alone, in his hermitage, he would cut wood, and then he had like a little metal press, and he was making images of the panagia
Yeah.
into this little the sections of pine that he had, I guess, and you would buy them down in like the gift shop, and people not know that this was made by the hands of this holy man.
Wow.
He would fix his robes while he would talk to us. So he he was just uh, a, a so unassuming and yet uh, so aware of everything. And so yeah, there's some things that he said that afterwards it made a lot more sense to me, like this story that I told in the program about how he said, "Oh, maybe I'll come to America one day," and then I have this experience of relics
Yeah.
coming into my possession, and that started with him, and this picture of him in the altar inexplicably. And
Well, let's get to the program. I'm trying to remember, when was it you first floated this idea past? It was well before we had even met. And and that's not to say it took a long time to get there, but it took a long time to get there. and
that's very
but
good. You were
well,
so patient with me. Thank
well
you
worth
so.
the wait. Well worth the wait. I'll tell you, I cannot recommend this podcast high enough. It will inspire you. It will encourage you. And let's talk about the title: Signs in Our Times. What's behind that title, Father?
So there is a very similar passage in scripture, right? Simia Keron, where Jesus speaks about the signs of the times. And those are very bad signs. And we talk about this in the introduction. And it's that sense of, are we in the end times? Are the things that are happening in the world today? And with signs inner times, I'm kind of playing off of that, but trying to, that the Lord is still with us, and He's not going to abandon us, and we can see that in the life of the church, that there is evidence besides the faith that people have in Him, their understanding, their virtues that they live. There are people like Saint Paisios and everyday people that God still allows these miracles to happen, that are signs of that He's still with us, and the kingdom of heaven is just there, outside of the lens of what we can see, but very present all around us, that help us to appreciate who uh, the Orthodox Church really is, and what it is to the world.
I don't know if I can explain this well or not, but I'm coming at this from the perspective of a evangelical for most of my life. Had never heard of the Orthodox faith until much later in life, and knowing about some in Christendom, more Pentecostal, more charismatic, would talk about miracles today.
Right.
And I was trained and brought up to believe that yes, God works miracles, but maybe not as you are thinking of them, and certainly not as they are being shown on television by the televangelists,
Sure.
where It's really more of an act of coercion or of trickery. And so miracles are not to be equated with what you see on television, because somehow we had drawn a line, and I don't know exactly when in time that line was drawn,
Hmm.
drawing a distinction between the New Testament miracles of Christ and the apostles, to then somewhere along the line in history, all that stopped and no more
Yeah.
miracles took place. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
becoming Orthodox, I learned a whole new world of meaning behind the miraculous that was not weird, that was not um, uh, uh, needing to be under the scrutiny of skepticism, because when they happened, those who observed them, their first reaction was pray that you're not being influenced by a demon, and helping us to be very careful about the miraculous. And I loved your first podcast. And I would encourage everybody, if you're going to listen to Signs in the Times, start with episode number 1, because in that, you just do a wonderful job of explaining what this is, what this isn't, and why it's important. So, could you tell us a little bit about that now, maybe in an abbreviated sense?
Sure. Um, when I would listen to Ancient Faith Radio, and I was a huge fan, and felt so benefited and empowered for my
Mm.
ministry and work as a parish priest from so many of the podcasts. I noticed that it seemed to me that there was something that maybe wasn't being touched on a great deal, and that was these type of things. And I remember having a conversation with Leonidis Milani, the abbess of the Monastery of St. John Chrysostom in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and she's full of these type of stories. She in her early time of being, even before she became a novice, but already planning on becoming a nun, living in Athens with Saint Porphyrios. She had so many experiences, tremendous, which I haven't shared yet. I have so many more to share. But so she would say that our church is living. Our church is alive. The, the, these type of things that happen just help us to appreciate more fully everything else that we confess and that we theologize is true about our worship life, about what it means to be a Christian who, in other words, to Christ lives mystically within us, and to live a life in such a way that He can use us and work through us in the world. And so I remember, just reaching out to you and saying I'm thinking about something like this, and you're being very positively responding to me. And I mean, I'm not going to go into any great detail, but I think a good deal of, besides just the dysfunctionality of my own life, and and organization is not my forte, but it took me a while to kind of get over, in a sense, the hump of um, getting these stories out there, and worrying that how people may respond to them, and how people may question them, and I just needed to think about it a great deal. So when I wrote that introduction, in a way, it was like my apology, right? It was like explaining the purpose for wanting to do this podcast, and to me, it's experiential, because these stories have helped me in
Yeah.
my journey of faith, and I found that when I would preach, for example, and I would use one of these stories, every eye would be on you. People would be much more attentive, as much quieter we utilize story in general. Father Alex Busetis interviewed me for his one of his program, Family Matters,
Family
and he
Matters, yes, right here on
this
Ancient Faith.
this tremendous quote about stories, and how important and powerful they are. So I just knew that it had that potential. And then, as I talk about in the introduction, how I saw the positive effect that they would have on my own family and my own children, and when I could share these stories with with my children and how wonderfully they would receive them,
Yeah.
their hearts, and it would help them. And then going on and ministering to others and seeing the same effect with them. So, but it was the pandemic really that finally made me say I have to start it because I have to keep my doing my work as a priest and getting the good news out there.
So these are stories that have been told and recorded in more recent times, as opposed to those from maybe the early centuries of the church. That's why it signs in our times. I'm
Exactly.
wondering, what is the source for your stories? Where do you hear and read these stories?
Well, as someone can see if they look through the introductions, they come from so many different
Yeah.
places. One of the books that pushed me to finally say I just have to do this was a book called Ascetics in the World, and I think it was in 2012 when I was on the Holy Mountain. One of the abbots had read us a story from it, the Blessed Simeon, and it was such a powerful story. And he gave me a copy of the book in Greek, and he said, "Go to the cell of Prodromo, where Father Chrysostomos is there, and or Father, not Chrysostomos. I'm blanking on his name right now, and get the blessing from him to translate it into English." And I came back to America, and somebody else was already translating it, but I knew he was going to need help editing it um, and putting it in a little bit more palatable, um, uh, uh, understandable English. And so I worked on that for a number of years. And those stories, I would just share them with people as I would read them. And they're about everyday people
Yeah.
in Greece of the last century, not not the saints that we recognize, and mostly who are monastics and in clergy. It was people who were married, many of the stories, and people who had jobs in the world and so forth, and yet still lived um, committed lives to Christ. Their relationship with Christ was showed fully. They had ascetics in the world. They had a real appreciation for practicing what what is the manner in which we can invite God's grace more fully into our hearts and our lives.
Yeah.
And so people, I've only shared one or two stories from it thus far, but they'll hear a lot more from that. And these are all the things over the years. I hear something and it just sticks with me. Um, because I forget so many things. Memory's going, so I have to like script most of these.
Yeah.
But I hear when the story touches my heart, then I don't forget it, and especially if I start repeating, it stays with me.
I remember asking you early on, Father, will there be enough of these to sustain a podcast? And you kind of laughed just like you laughed just now. uh, Tell us about the supply.
Yeah. So um, that I, I there's there. Where do I start? So meeting holy people in our own times, meeting uh, there and being a little bit more fully immersed in the communities that are living very powerfully and fully life in Christ, as I was in Greece, or the pilgrimages that I've been able to take since then, not only to Greece, to Cyprus, to the Holy Land, and in America. The stories just seem to permeate these places. And there are many books that actually share these stories, but they're kind of like individual stories, like the story about Saint Nicephorus that came from a life that was just recently translated into English a few years ago by one of the monasteries in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in Life Giving Spring in California. Um, and so I have a pretty extensive library, I guess, but sometimes they're just experiences that I've had myself.
Yeah.
And so some of the stories you can tell when I've not scripted it and I'm just freely sharing what I remember and
Yeah.
how I remember too.
Well, I should have looked before we started recording. How many episodes are currently available?
I don't know. We're over a dozen,
Yeah.
maybe close to 14 or
I know
15.
I just received a new one yesterday, which we'll be
Yeah.
posting a little bit later today. But the one just prior to that, which was posted, well, let's be honest, it was posted a couple of days ago, and then there was some problems with the editing, which is totally my fault. So we posted the revised version this morning, and it's called I Am Saint Nectarios. And with your blessing, I think it would be nice for our listeners to be able to hear that, and then we can talk about it afterwards. Anything you want to say before we start?
Um, well, uh, uh, no, because it's pretty much in. It tells the story tells a lot of the background to it too. Um, I often when it's the feast day of Saint Nectarios, there's 3 or 4 different miracles that people have related to me directly, and I just chose this one first to record. So I think let's just listen.
Okay, very good.
Thou art the God who workest wonders.
I am Saint Nectarios. Saint Nectarios is one of the most beloved of saints of the 20th century. There are books in many languages recalling the countless miracles that he has done and continues to do throughout the world. The huge church recently built on the location of the monastery of the Holy Trinity, which he founded on the island of Aegina at the end of his life, is the biggest church in all of Greece for this reason. Our sign, however, comes from America, from a woman who grew up in New Jersey. She grew up with a great house and enrolled at the Church of St. George in Clifton, New Jersey. They have a chapel dedicated to St. Nectarios and a relic of the saint in order to ask his intercessions. She married a man from Greece while still young, and early in their marriage, wanting to make him something Greek to eat, I decided to make him empanadas, though she had never made them before. She put a large pot of oil on the stove in order to deep fry the balls of mouse. When she returned, flames were the oil which was on fire, and the cabinets above the fire fell. Without thinking, she rushed to take the pot off the stove and grabbed the pot with her bare hands. Immediately burning her hands, she then dropped the pot, which poured the burning hot oil down the entire front of her body. Sensing that she was about to slip and fall into the oil and on the ground, and fearing to burn herself, she cried out, "Not my case!" She immediately felt presence, which pushed her out of the oil. She somehow made her way to a neighbor's house, who then called the ambulance for her. She was taken to the burn center in Phillipsburg, New Jersey. At the burn center, they determined that she had third-degree burns over 38% of her body, and her condition was serious. The treatment that they began was to soak her body in a tub of a special solution to help her burn wounds to heal. It was so excruciatingly painful that she would lay awake all night, prolonging the time before she would have to be treated again. As she lay awake, she prayed that God would take her life. One night, as she was praying, she sensed the presence of someone above her. Looking up behind her, she said that she saw the most beautiful face that she had ever seen in her life. He had a long white beard. The visitor said to her, "I am Saint Nectarios. God has sent me to you to tell you to stop praying for him to take your life. You must live, for you have a purpose which you need to fulfill." He then placed his hands on her head, and she felt a peace go throughout her entire body. He stood next to her and smiled as she slowly fell asleep. When she awoke that morning, she remembered everything and excitedly told the nurses what had happened. They told her that she was on a morphine drip and that it was just a hallucination. She protested that she had actually seen a saint in her room. When they took her down for her treatment, her doctors, however, believed her account of what had happened, because when they placed her into the solution, she was crying tears of joy and even laughed, for she was not experiencing any pain whatsoever. Within 3 weeks, she was released from the burn center, though the scars remained on her body. The center asked her to come back occasionally to speak to the other burn patients, to encourage them with her story, which was even told in the local newspapers. Her first husband divorced her, but she remarried and conceived and gave birth to a little girl who has given her life purpose, has become the center and focus of her life, as St. Nectarios had intimated. This sign was shared on Ancient Faith Radio, that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that believing you may have life in his name.
That's beautiful, Father. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
We need to do a shout out. Many people have commented on the music that we use at the beginning and the end, and so I have 3 people I want to thank for that. First, I want to thank Charlie Marge from Boston Byzantine Choir for allowing us to use the intoning at the beginning and at the end. Beautiful albums from Boston Byzantine Choir. We'd encourage you to look up those. And then we have a very good friend up in Canada by the name of Alexa Lauschuk. And Alexa is a gifted musician, composer. He was interviewed, by the way, last night on Everyday Orthodox. So you can learn more about Alexa on Elisa Bielicich's show last night, Everyday Orthodox. But Alexa has provided some other compositions for us. But this one he did for us free of charge, and he created the music to go together with the Boston Byzantine Choir opening and ending, and then his brother-in-law Blair Lofgren, a very talented cellist, played beautifully the cello interlude, both at the beginning and the end. So thanks to Charlie, to Alexa, and to Blair. Now, Father, you end every program the same way. Talk about that phrase that you use, and what's the meaning behind what you're saying.
Well, I think it came to me actually while I was reading that gospel. It is one of the 11 gospel readings that we rotate through on the Sunday morning Orthodox gospel of the resurrection. But it's the account of Christ appearing to Thomas, and saying to him, ultimately, blessed are those who don't see and yet believe. And then John the Evangelist continues, that these were written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ. And it just struck me one day, oh, okay, we can do that with the podcast as well. This sign That's the same goal of this sign, to hopefully help people in some way to believe everything else, to believe the witness of Holy Scripture, and to open their hearts to the truth of Christ coming into the world. So it seems to me just, and you seem to agree, so
Mm.
we went.
Yes, and those of you who are reading with us through the Bible in 1 year with our friend Father Alexis Curry, with the daily Orthodox scriptures, know that yesterday we just finished up the Gospel of John, and we read that verse. These things are written that you may believe, and that believing you may have life in his name. And of course, I immediately thought of the podcast.
Yeah.
Uh,
And he and I were classmates at Holy Cross.
oh,
He
he's
came in a year after, but graduated with our class in
yeah.
19. So
Uh,
I enjoy listening to him every now and just he always had such a calm and
he really
faithful, and,
does. Daily
pleasant.
Orthodox Scriptures. If you're not familiar with that, listeners, another great podcast that we would encourage you to take a look at.
Yeah.
So, Father, what are some of the stories that are coming up in the next couple of weeks?
Okay. Um, there's a couple of stories from ascetics in the world that I've been wanting to share. One of them is about a young man, Constandi, they called him. He I won't tell the whole story, but when he was young, he was practically orphaned. His mother died. His father was working actually on the Holy Mountain, and he was being raised by his aunt. And at a very difficult moment in his young childhood, Saint Nicholas came to him, and um, and he was sick, and he, in a very kind of considerate but subtle manner, healed him and told him that from now on, and his mother who was very devout, uh, had impressed upon him her love for Saint Nicholas, and and so he spent. Uh, Saint Nicholas said to him, "I will be with you, and just turn to me." And his entire life, he had this very unique, powerful, and real relationship with Saint Nicholas. Right, his last actions before he died, he was talking to somebody lying on his side, and no one could see, but it had come known towards the end of his life, this unique and special relationship with Saint Nicholas, who would appear to him throughout his life. So that's a story I am very happy to share. And there's another story about his name is Father Elias Liamendidis, and he suffered in his early life, but allowed the way he suffered allowed for much grace to come into his life, and he had a relationship not only with Saint Nicholas, but Saint George was very often coming to him, and the whole family would kind of experience this grace and this presence, and he himself, very similar to some of the other contemporary priest, but married priest, 6 children, all 6 girls. One of his daughters became a nun, and it's mostly one daughter and some grandchildren that shared these stories. And Father Paisios actually, so the stories in the ascetics in the world, many of them, Father Paisios was finding out about and was starting that collection, and he comments on how he saw what um, what he Father Elias went through in his early life,
Mm.
and how he handled that. So, without spoiling the story, that's another, I think, that I'm looking forward to share. Um, there there are other teachings on the faith and our understanding of miracles that I want to continue to share. Writings of some of the fathers on miracles, or commenting on a particular miracle. And I've only shared a couple so far, so I hope to start incorporating some of those a
Good.
little bit more. Um,
Well, giving
and
us something to look forward to.
yeah, I'm tempted to just hold off on stories until it's closer to, say, like the feast day, where we celebrate that particular saint or
Oh, sure.
something about a particular event in the life of the church and share it
Right.
around that time. But um, it's as you've become very aware, John. I can only to work on this when I can make the time to do it. Having a parish and other responsibilities that's I have to attend to first. So
Of
um,
course. We're
it,
so
it comes
grateful,
so
Father, for what we do get. And you're doing well. There's quite a few of them and more to come. So we'll take it.
I think it's a good rhythm.
It
Yeah,
is. It
yeah.
is.
To do it daily was just not going to happen. You saw that a long time before I did. But
Well, we were sure willing, but I have to admit, I knew that would become a burden pretty
yeah,
quickly. Well, let me tell people exactly where they find the podcast. If you go to our homepage, it's the most recent podcast series. So if you looked at the top and you looked at radio and podcasts, and then the pull down menu says podcasts, it'll be the first one that shows up. Or you can go directly there at ancientfaith.com/podcasts/signs. All right, ancientfaith.com/podcast/signs. And as is true with all of our podcasts, you can, of course, listen to them right on the website, but you can also subscribe. And I would strongly recommend you subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Also available on the app, of course, and you can even download it on your app and listen to it at your convenience. So do take advantage of this great resource. And Father Theodore, we just want to thank you for your passion for these stories, your commitment to sharing them with us, and the blessing that we're all receiving as the result. Thank you so very much.
thank you, John. If I could take one more moment and just make a request to
Yes,
those that are listening along live now or may come across this later.
please.
Uh, a very very dear friend of mine who he's kombaro in the Greek. That means we baptized someone's child in some way, and we baptized one of his children, Seraphim. He recently found out that he has lung cancer, and it's serious. It's very serious. His name is Father George Livanos, a very beloved priest of our metropolis of Pittsburgh. He's at All Saints Parish in Kennisburg. And we know many people are already praying for him, but let's all raise our voices together and put him in God's hands, and may God be glorified. We would love it if God would work a sign in a way that keeps Father George with us longer,
Yes.
but in whatever way that he just may be glorified. But I ask people to pray for Father George Livanos, his wife Petrides, and their whole family. Very beloved by our family, Petrides, and as I say, so many others.
Yes, I would encourage any clergy listening to add that to the prayers that are prayed at the altar, or those of you who can submit names to your priest for remembering on the Lord's Day. That would be greatly appreciated. Uh, Father, thank you for joining us. Blessings on this wonderful outreach and ministry and on your new work there in Reading. And you are not terribly far, about an hour away from Emmaus, where we are building a new studio for
So,
Father Andrew Damick to use. And so you are going to be one of the individuals that we bring into that studio from time to time and do some other types of programming as well as you are willing and able. So we look forward to more to come.
John, I just thought of one more source too. I was
Oh,
blanking
yes,
earlier.
sure. Go ahead.
Another real reason that I started the podcast was to have gone up again and again and again to St. George, the Carpatho-Russian Orthodox Church in Taylor, Pennsylvania, where an icon now for over 8 years of the Mother of God, known as Kardiotissa, has been continuously streaming myrrh. And so something to look forward to for our listeners is Father Mark just sent me many stories that he had taken the time to write out. And I've been kind of waiting on that to share more from that experience. But even myself, I've witnessed and had people that I've prayed for and anointed with this have miraculous healing. So many more of those. We'll see
Thank
those
God.
much more regularly at this point in the podcast. And
We'll look forward to that. And as other stories come to your attention, a current of this type of miraculous event, we would love to hear about them and what you know about them as well. So thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Well, you've been
Thank you.
very generous with your time, so thank you. We'll let you get back. This is your day off, so we don't want to take advantage of that. I'm glad you were able to get out with your wife to walk, but thank her for letting us borrow you on this Monday, which is usually a time of relaxation and rest for our wonderful.
Kristen went shopping.
Oh, good, good. Well, maybe you better go check on things really quick here then.
Okay. All right.
All
Please
right.
give everybody there, Bobby, everybody in Ancient Faith, our regards, and just keep up the good work. We're so edified
By your
by the
prayers,
work that
Father.
you're doing and bringing Orthodoxy together. It's one of the best things
Oh,
happening in America.
thank God. You're very kind. Take care.
All right, John. Bye bye.